Knock, knock.
Who's
Anybody
there?
home? Oh, just me. How are you?
Ah, I am all right. And you?
Just all right? What's the matter?
Oh, nothing.
Oh,
All right is all right.
oh, all right. I thought, all right's not all right.
Oh, it, right. Right is in the word, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So right is good, correct?
Right is good if you're right.
And if you're wrong,
If you're wrong, then right's not good.
oh no.
Well, how was your weekend?
um, Pretty uneventful. Um, just stayed home, played video games, homework, food. Food is
Oh,
good, indeed.
boring.
And yours?
Mine was I did a little bit of work, did a couple of supervised visitations, and did a lot of study.
Oh,
A lot of study and
sure.
research and practicing and learning how to become a video editor.
Video editor.
Yes.
Why? You're gonna. Oh wait. Well, you have to put them. You're gonna cut out snippets of the lecture and stuff and put it
Yeah, I
online.
actually practiced a little bit of that over the weekend. I take some of the lectures that I've been giving here. Like right now, when you speak, go ahead and speak. I'll
Mhm.
shut up.
Oh, okay.
See,
Yeah, I
then
can
your
speak.
name pops up. Okay.
Uh
And uh, I'm going to have it like very first when people jump in, their name pops up. I'm having just cutting that first out when everybody pops into here, cutting that all out, and a
huh.
little junk afterwards. And actually, what I did was broke up two of my, not this class here, but for critical reasoning, broke up two of them into into separate videos. So uh,
Oh,
that way they I was hoping that they would fit on YouTube, but they still don't. They're still too big. So uh,
even in half.
yeah, so they're like 45 minutes each, and even those are too big.
Uh
So I
huh.
got to figure out what I'm going to be able to get that in there because I'd like to start making a just a slug of videos and learning how to edit them. You know, like in the beginning of the video, they'll you can put a little text on there like who it is and what this text is about, that sort of stuff. So just to
Uh
make
huh.
it a little more interesting. So
Excuse me.
yepper. Anyway, uh-huh. So I was in learning mode all weekend. I suppose I should get my sign-in sheet. And I was researching different kinds of equipment that I would need to set up my own recording studio here at my office. So lots of stuff. I did go out and um, buy me a different laptop, one that's designed for higher end audio and video. And a
Oh,
good
like
friend of
Apple
mine
product.
stopped by the office on Saturday and gave me a really nice webcam. Yeah, that
Because you
was,
were talking about they were sold out.
yeah, they were. And I mentioned that to him. He actually stopped in. His wife, he's a good friend of mine, but his wife also works for me. he stopped in to pick up a check for her, and I was telling him what I was doing and told him I couldn't get a webcam, and so he went and found what it is at his work, and they have they have a guy down there who's got tons of equipment. He said, "Here, you can just have this." So he gave it to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of nice.
It's really nice. It is really nice.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm eating.
Hey, so we got Alicia, and we got McKenna. Then we got me, and that's it.
4 more minutes, or 3 more minutes. No,
3 more minutes. Did you get an email with this invitation?
Yes.
Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Those, I spent probably 3 or 4 hours just looking at comparing different video editing software. I go to, whenever I buy something that's of any expense, I always go on the internet to do reviews and look at professionals who have compared them one to another.
I
Before
know
I
there's
make.
a lot of free stuff online. You can edit your videos free.
Pardon?
I know you can edit your videos for free online if you find the right place.
Yeah,
Would
and
you
I
go
actually
there?
did. I used a free one to create 2 videos yesterday, but then they have what do they call that? Watermark on them. They have a watermark on them, so it gives the name of the video editor that's on there on the entire time. So I don't want to do that. The ones that are totally free that don't have that don't have a whole lot of functionality. So I will probably I will actually buy a video editor, but I didn't want to do it till I got this new computer, and I just picked it up literally an hour and a half ago. So I'm just been playing with it.
Did you get an Apple computer?
Pardon?
Did you get an Apple computer?
I did not get an Apple.
Those are the best for video and audio.
They are typically,
Darn
but
expensive.
they're also super expensive. And I had a long talk with an old friend of mine who has a computer business, and he said that there's a particular tablet, well, it's a laptop, it's not a tablet, that was created by Dell that was just for creating videos. And it's got really great graphics, and it's got high RAM memory, and so they had one used one there, and that was refurbished, and it was only $400. So
Only? Oh, good Lord.
well, you get into the newer iMacs, they're $2,500 the starting, So,
yeah, that's a lot.
so, and I'm not rich like you are.
Right.
So I can't afford all that. All right, I think I have everybody checked in who's here so far. Good morning, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Oh, it is. Oh, yes, it is afternoon on this. I need to get some
What
new
is it?
batteries in my clock in here because it's 4 minutes till. Okay, there's A111. Who was that last time? Was that Joshua? Yes, it was. And then who else? Jada just signed in. Okay, still got waiting for a couple of people here, but um, anyway, it's noon, so we might as well get started, yes? Or say no, or ignore me.
Yes.
Okay. All right, just checking, just checking. Have most people, everybody is no video, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Most of them have no, they're also muted. So from that, I assume they are not ready for public viewing, number one. And number two, they're going to be doing other things like on the phone or texting or watching movies or something while they're doing this. So they don't want to have their audio on also. So that's how I read this. But it's life. That's what we do. So did everyone take the 2 quizzes already that are up there for religion?
I took the first quiz.
Okay.
I have yet to take the second quiz.
Okay, but it's up there, I think.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's up there. And there'll be a third one up there probably tomorrow.
All right.
So, but as far as I'm concerned, we can go ahead and launch into some lecture, shall we? Okay. Now, I want to give you a forewarning here. I went and purchased a different laptop here, and I've only had it in my grimy hands now for about an hour and a half. And I've spent the last hour and a half downloading stuff to the computer. And so there's a few things I have to learn about it yet. So if things don't go well, that's the excuse I'm going to give you. Okay. All righty. So let's go ahead and does anyone have any questions? Because I basically have finished up the lectures on Vedantic Hinduism and Vedic Hinduism. Anyone have any questions about that left over? No. Did
I
somebody
think
leave?
we've covered it pretty thoroughly.
Okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. I try to do it thoroughly. So, so now we're going to move on into Buddhism. That's what's on the plate for today. So, as I mentioned in last class, the Hinduism, even modern Hinduism, is who's QL now? I don't know why this signs in with these weird things like Josh. He signs in as somebody else, and it pops over his name. Anyway, as I mentioned last class, that Hinduism essentially changed. It became originally it was a religion. Oh, that's Danny. That's who that is. Okay, so Danny is now here, and originally in the Vedic religion, people had it. There's things they could do in their religion, and as far as interacting with the gods. In modern Hinduism, that went less and less away. Although they could still, most of them still had these little areas in their house where they could worship these individual gods. But the god behind the gods, Brahman, wasn't anyone really that they could connect with. Number one, when you have a god that is way up above everyone, that is not really, you can't really connect with them. Now I'm going to do a whiteboard here. Let's. How come I can't do my whiteboard? Oh, here it is. Okay. When you have a god that is far away, that you have people, down here on earth, and the god is way far away, you have a god that is known as a transcendent god. Transcendent. Far away. So transcendent gods can have, similar qualities, or even sometimes all the quality. Is that ENT or ANT?
I think it's ENT.
I think it is ENT. That ANT just didn't look right to me.
Yeah.
Transcendent God is a God that is far away. So that's like, let's see, what would be a good example? It'd be like a president of a country. You know, they're there, they have qualities, but you know, you're not going to be closely communicating with them. They're just too far away from that for that. Okay. On the other hand, you can have a God that is immanent. Immanent. The God that is immanent is a God that is close. An immanent God is a God who is near to you, and you can have almost intimate interactions with. And even though back in Vedic Hinduism, the gods were powerful, they weren't all powerful, but they were pretty powerful. They were still immanent. And there you could have conversation, you know, you could, you know, pray to them, et cetera, et cetera. When you get to to modern Hinduism, you have the immanent gods, but the immanent gods are the ones who really, how shall I say this? They're not really separate gods. They're philosophical creations in the minds of the people. The real God, Brahman, is transcendent and is far beyond everyone. And so there's not a real connection or attachment. The thing about gods is, in general, people, I'm going to say this nicely, people use them. They want powerful people around them because then they can get you helpful things, and you want powerful gods around you because they can do things for you. And so it's like the whole notion of prayer. The number one time when people pray is when they need something. They typically don't just sit down and pray when life is grand and everything's going their way. Prayer is typically more often partaken in when the person is need of a powerful being to do something on their behalf. So I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that's the way it is. And so the first thing you want to have in a God is powerful. But if it's a powerful transcendent God it's not really close and doesn't necessarily pay much attention to the day-to-day things that are going on down on earth, they're not nearly as important. So you want a God that is powerful enough to do things, to answer those prayers, and is immanent enough to hear them, and actually cares enough to respond. Because again, if you had one that was transcendent and powerful and could hear but didn't care, it wouldn't help you much at all. So the nature of the gods were the God behind the gods, Brahman, was a transcendent God and didn't have a lot of interaction directly with the followers. But so that was one of the problems. But one of the biggest problems, and I hate to use that word that way, but the downside or weakness of modern Hinduism was that it didn't deal with the number one issue that people have in life. And you know what that is? What's the number one issue that people have in life?
Money?
No, that's only if you're a college student. No. Good guess, though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Suffering. That old suffering thing. Stuff goes wrong in your life. Stuff's not happening the way you want it. And so you're having this suffering going on, and you want to have something done about it. Who is this? Oh, that's Danny. He texted me. He's in now. So if you don't have a religion that can help you with the problems that you're having in life, what good is it? Not much.
It's not good for you. It's just
it's not much good for you. And so and that's really what ended up happening with modern Hinduism, is that it didn't really have a real helpful answer to the suffering that people had. Matter of fact, can anyone think you can articulate what the solution was if you were having some bad stuff happening in your life? You know what the solution
Go
to
get a
that?
motorcycle, get more amounts.
You go to
Pardon?
a shaman or a priest, and they'll make an offering for you.
Well, in classical Hinduism, yes. Not in modern.
No, it's your own fault.
Yeah, the answer is it's your own fault. So what do you do about it?
You can't do anything about it.
Can't do anything about it. You
It's
nor
just-
anyone else is going to do anything about it. And even worse than that, you shouldn't want anything done about it. What you should do is suck it up. Because you are in this state. You are having these things happen to you because you deserve it. You
Because of
made
something
choices.
you did in like and you deserve it because of something you did in a previous life
Sure.
that allowed you this bad stuff to happen to you. So you should just deal with it because you were a bad person before.
Yep. Exactly. That was all correct except one little thing. It's not just previous life, it's previous lives.
Right.
Yeah. So, but yes. So the number one response that you should have to bad stuff happening in your life is simply to say, it's my fault, suck it up. And I'm not going to do anything to ameliorate the problem. I'm going to just suck up the consequences to the problem, because if I try to make things better, then it's just going to push forward my karmic debt into my next life. So that sort of a mindset of simply suck it up is not satisfying to a lot of people. But it's really what was being taught in modern Hinduism, and still is. So anyway, we go back to a fella named what?
I can see the wheels turning. Like, how do I spell this guy's name?
Oh, it's actually it's got an H in there. Siddhartha. Well, it's not just seeing my wheels turning. You have to realize that, when you're typing, you're, keyboarding here in front of everyone. And so there's a and for most people, there's a tendency to make mistakes when people are watching you keyboard. That's just the way it is in life. So you have a guy named Siddhartha Gautama, and this is spelled various ways. Most people today would say Gautama, but for many, many years, it actually was Gautama instead. And you will still find some books that have that name in there. And this guy lived in India back in the 6th century BC, northern India, and he was a good Hindu. So he grew up with all the beliefs that we've been talking about here from modern Hinduism. By the time he hits the scene, the modern doctrine of reincarnation and of the transcendent gods, of dharma and doing your duty as a way to move up the chain, move higher up, and then finally when you get to the top of the ladder there, you can achieve a moksha if you are a Brahmin. And again, that's the kind of a thing. Everyone knows what caste they're in, and if you're not a Brahmin, you're simply, the chances of you even if you're in the Kshatriya class, if you're a warrior, if you are that, you still have possibly hundreds, if not thousands, of more lives to get up to being a Brahmin. And even if you're a Brahmin, it doesn't mean that you are, you know, high up in the Brahmin category. There, you still could have hundreds or thousands of lives to get up to there. And so there's this sense that I'm just going to suffer. Life's just going to be crappy for me, and that's just the way it is. And the chances of me escaping this are pretty darn slim. So Gautama was born to a fairly wealthy, powerful guy. His dad was rich and had lots of property. He had servants, and so Gautama's life really was actually pretty good compared to an awful lot of other people. But his dad, and again, this is all, how do I say this? The earliest accounts we have of him actually written down are probably 2nd century BC. So they're a good 3, maybe 400 years after his life. So we have probably at least 3, maybe 400 years where the stories of his life are just communicated orally. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that there was quite a bit of time there in between before they got written down, before it decided someone to write stuff down. And again, that's not unusual. You know, and you go back to that far, you go back to 500 BC, not hardly anyone read or was able to write. Most people didn't know. All they could do was speak the language. They didn't write, and they certainly couldn't read. So it wouldn't be, it's not like that would be completely normal at that time to have that be the case. But so these accounts of his life are a couple 300 years after, or at least 300 years after his life. And in those accounts that we have, it's recorded that his father had tried to isolate, probably the better word is insulate him, actually probably both. He isolated him from the hard things in life so he could insulate him from the suffering. And so according to the texts, he basically raised him on this big huge compound that he had, and just kept him there and didn't allow him to go out and see all the bad stuff that happened in the world. And you know, again, I think most parents want to keep their children from the harshness of life. I remember my sister once telling me that she was driving down Highway 50 many years ago, and her 2 boys were in the car, and there was an accident on the highway, and so the police, the sheriffs were kind of, you know, directing people around the accident. The rescue squad wasn't even there yet, so they're directing people around. And as they were driving around, it was in the summer, so they had their windows down. Her boys could hear this woman screaming in her car, and so she wanted to, you know, like, boys, cover your ears. She didn't want them to hear the screams of this woman in pain, because those are things that, you know, those kind of memories can stick with you for a long time, and she wanted to protect her sons from those memories, so just block them out so they don't occur. So this is sort of what Siddhartha's father did, except he was wealthy, so was able probably to accomplish it better than most people. So this is the way he grew up. He ended up becoming a young man and getting married and even having a child. And we don't know how old he was at this time, but likely mid 20s or so, possibly a little bit older than that, but probably not. And something happened to him that changed his life and changed, well, we say changed the world too. There's a lot of Buddhists around today. What is the number of Buddhists? What is that number? I think something like, well, there's several 100 million. I know that. I don't know how many 100 million, but there's several 100 million Buddhists around. So, it's affected an awful lot of people. Anyway, so what happened was that Siddhartha saw three things that shook him to the core. The first thing he saw was somebody that was really, really old. And I'm not here to try and defend or describe how this might happen, but somehow or other, he was kept from being in the presence of really old people. Now, it wouldn't have been that hard because even when I started teaching world religions, at that time, the life expectancy in India was around 42 years old. So you wouldn't have a lot of old people because they just don't live very long because life is so difficult there. At least it was. It's much better now. But so you didn't have a lot of old people because they died. So anyway, he hadn't seen an old person, and finally he saw an old person for the first time in his life. And his reaction to seeing a super old person is probably the same one that you would have when you see a super old person. So when you turn on your Zoom and see this super old person lecturing at you, you go, ew, gag, it must be no fun being that old. I mean, gag, I mean, look, all that white hair, all the, their saggy, wrinkly skin, and the throat sounds are raspy, and they don't seem to have a lot of energy and all that sort of stuff. And you say, getting old is not very fun. And it looks to me like it could involve suffering, actually. And of course, you and I both know that a lot of old people do suffer as they get older. As their body starts to collapse, and all of them do. They start to break down and wear out. And quite often, people spend their days in pain. People spend their days in loss of abilities to function as different systems of the body break down. And so he saw this old person and basically was shocked at that. So then sometime later, he saw somebody else. And he saw a sick person, someone who was very, very ill. And again, if the traditions are correct, his father had made it so that he was not around anyone who was sick. As soon as they got sick, they must have, carted him off somewhere else, so he wasn't around him. And so I saw some really, really sick. And I don't know how many of you have been around people who are really, really ill, but it's difficult to watch. I actually had a former student of mine. She was in my critical reasoning class, and when she started the class, she seemed like she was just kind of an average person. She was probably in her early 40s. And then a few weeks into the class, she came to me and said that she had cancer and it had come back again, and it was in remission for a while, but it came back, and she didn't know if she was going to be able to stay with the class because she's going to have to go and do chemo again, which can be pretty nasty. And I said, well, as long as you're healthy, it's fine with me. I don't care that, we have to work around your condition. We can do that. So, if you want to stay in, stay. I welcome you staying in the class. So she ended up staying in the class, but things got pretty bad for her. And then about a year after that, she contacted me after the semester was over. She contacted me and wanted to meet and talk, and we did, and ended up becoming not super good friends, but became friends with her and with her family. Actually, I became very good friends with her dad. But she got to the point to where they had to put her in hospice because they knew that there was no way she was going to recover. And I actually went up to her, up to visit her in the hospital and then in hospice. And I was with her. I think I actually stayed there 24/7 the last 3 days of her life. And it was just, watching someone slowly die like that is no fun. It's not for weenies. And certainly it makes us very aware of um, um, our own death that we're going to suffer at some point in time. Usually for most people, it makes them think of that. But anyway, Gautama saw somebody sick and he thought, this doesn't look very fun at all. This is not good. And gosh, I mean, how many people are actually out there in the world getting sick, and how many people are actually out there in the world getting old? And it made him very, very disconcerted. And then he saw something else. He saw a dead person for the first time in his life. And of course, that didn't look very good at all. And to see a dead body where the life has left it, it's cold, and almost not human, simply because the spirit is gone from the body. But something that is not very attractive, not something that makes you feel comfortable, makes you feel good. And the seeing these three things essentially caused him to really, really question what it was that he was believing in his living his life as a Hindu, because it seemed like his belief system, everything in his life that sort of was the groundwork for his faith, was being called into question. And so then the fourth thing that he saw a Hindu, a wise man, a teacher, one of the someone in one of the Brahmins, probably a Brahmin renouncer. And he went to him and said, "What does our religion have to deal with all this suffering that's around us? What solution does Hinduism have for the average person who is living their life with suffering?" And the priest basically said, "Got nothing. Suck it up. Suck it up, deal with it, and don't make it better." And he was extremely dissatisfied with that answer and decided, well, if that's all Hinduism had to offer for this suffering, which seemed to be everywhere now, because he left the compound and was looking now at people, he became very, very disillusioned with Hinduism and decided there must be something else out there. So he left his father's compound, left his wife and child, and went out to try and find a different path to walk on that would actually deal with the suffering in life. He went and looked into various other religious traditions, but he ended up camping in just this general practice of asceticism. And I don't think I've mentioned that so far, have I? I think I used that word yet. Asceticism. Asceticism is a practice by which you deny yourself physical pleasures to have spiritual gain. That's a part of it, but it could even go further than that. You're at least denying yourself physical pleasures, but some people take it even further, excuse me, and they actively provide themselves with physical pain. So some ascetics just do things so that they don't look for pleasure any longer, but some actually do things to harm themselves. They'll walk around and whip themselves on the back with thongs, or they'll sleep on cold hard floors with no mattress, nothing. they also will, sometimes that you probably weren't, you probably don't have an awareness of this because you're too young, but it used to be a kind of a thing where you'd see that these people laying down on a bed of nails, where they actually put nails through like a big sheet of wood, and so it was just solid, not solid, but nails all across, several feet wide and several feet long, and then they would lay on them, and not just for fun, and not just to prove how tough they were, but they'd lay on them as a way to give themselves pain, and the pain would be a part of them learning to put aside what was going on with their body so that they could have spiritual gain. So that's what asceticism does. Asceticism was, you could say that pretty much all of the renouncers in general practice asceticism because they no longer did anything to gain food or clothing or shelter. So in that sense, they were denying themselves physical stuff. And of course, in that culture, the renouncers were in fact the ones who people looked up to as being the ones who had achieved some higher level of spirituality. And so they tied together this practice of asceticism with advancement in your spirit, in coming to spiritual truth or spiritual readiness, all that stuff. And so he became an ascetic, and he gave himself to it really, really wholeheartedly, completely. And got to the point actually where it became so weak that he was at the point of death. And according to the stories, he would have died except that he had some friends, and they came and found him in this state, and they basically forced him, brought him with them and forced him to take food and water to save his life. And they were able to do that because he was so weak he couldn't fight back. So after he then was resuscitated and grew back to strength again, he realized that this wasn't really getting him anywhere either. Now, before he was an ascetic, he lived a life of, pretty much he had anything and everything that a person could have because he had a rich daddy. And so he had a life full of all that the physical body wanted. And then he also had a life of which was completely bereft of all physical pleasures. And neither of those paths brought him any satisfaction, brought him any answers. And so he essentially was frustrated that there were any right answers to this. He was looking for a path that would lead him to some delivery from suffering, but nothing that he tried gave an answer. So what he did was he ended up deciding just to go and sit down under a tree and just said, I'm done going out looking for the answer. I'm just going to sit down here under a tree in the shade and wait for the answer to come to me. Don't try this at home. Okay. But according to the account, that's what he did in life. He just sat there under this tree, and he was there for quite a long time. And then one day, as he was sitting there, something happened to him, and he became aware of the answer. It came to him in a single moment. in the twinkling of an eye, he became aware of the truths of the universe just by sitting under a tree. Has anyone here ever happened to them?
No,
No?
not
Huh.
under a tree specifically.
Okay. How about under the influence of mushrooms?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah. There have been many, many people who thought that they accomplished this under the influence of psychoactive drugs. But he wasn't that. He wasn't into the drugs, but he claimed that he literally, in just a moment in time, he was made aware of essentially all the truths of the universe. So he became, according to the tradition, enlightened. He saw the light, as the song says. Who sang that? Oh no, that was I Saw the Signs. Never mind. He saw the light. He became enlightened. And after having saw the light, he it was no longer was called Siddhartha. He was called the Enlightened One. And the Enlightened One actually comes from a root word, bod. So when you put it into someone's name or a title, it's the Buddha, the one who has achieved enlightenment. And achieved isn't the right word, the one who has experienced enlightenment. Although others would say that from their perspective of comparing it with other religious traditions, it is actually an achievement. It's something that you get, but certainly Buddhists would deny that. That's why I threw that out there. Buddhists would say, no one ever achieved enlightenment like they worked for it. It just came to them. So he was now the enlightened one. He was the one who had the answers to the universe. And is there a way to save these? Yes, there is. I just don't know what they are. Oh, here it is. Save. Okay. So we have now the birth of a new religious belief system. And this belief system certainly carries with it some of the doctrines of Hinduism, because he was a Hindu. His whole life up until that point, he was a Hindu. And so if any of you are in any way religious, or if you know people who are more than average religious, you know that their beliefs inform and impact many different areas in life. It's not just something they hold up into their head, but it works its way out in several different areas of their life. And matter of fact, most people understand that if you're going to be a fairly consistent follower of your religious tradition, that it should have impact in your life. It's not going to be just some doctrines you hold up in your head, but that it impacts the way you live your life. And it should have that reflection in the fleshly world down here, your spiritual life. So he did keep many of those doctrines that he had in the past, doctrines of, let's say, pantheistic monism. That is still the underlying metaphysical basis of Buddhism. He kept the notion of reincarnation, kept the, it's reincarnation, but it's slightly different. Let me put this up here. Text. Reincarnation, which again, is just simply upon the death of a physical body, the spirit then moves, leaves that body and goes and inhabits a different body, and typically a one that is just being born. So they start over again with a new life. In the Hindu doctrine, you would call it reincarnation, but it's slightly different in Buddhism. It's a little bit different name. It's called transmigration. Transmigration. It's essentially the word used for Buddhist reincarnation. And I will talk about that in a little bit, why it is different and why it's important that it's different. Okay. Before I launch into the truths that he learned, I also want to make mention that this doctrine of reincarnation wasn't really, it'd been around probably a couple hundred years in India. So it was fairly well established, and is well held belief. But it's also fascinating to me that the doctrine of reincarnation, you began to see people teaching it, speculating about it, and then teaching it in and around the Mediterranean around the same time, back around 500-600 BC. Whereas before that, you never saw it. So it began to crop up in India and over in the Grecian area at right around the same time. Many years ago, I did some research to try to figure out who had it first, who got it first, and then shared it with the other. I was unable to find any real evidence of how it was, where it started, and then who picked it up later. But there was quite a bit of trade back and forth between India and and the Palestinian area. So, well, the Israeli area at that time. So, but anyway, it was a firm part of the religious belief that Gautama had when he was being raised. And I said there's also the notion of dharma, that there's a duty that people have to do, and so those were similar things. But there were some things that he began to teach which were radically different than what the modern Hinduism was teaching. And in this moment of enlightenment that he had, he received what are referred to today as the Four Noble Truths. That's not helping. Let's do text. I'm tired of blue. Let's do red. Oh, wait, but it's noble, so it should be blue. My mistake.
It should be purple.
I don't see a purple in here. That's lavender. That's not too royal. It has to be a deep purple for it to be royal. The Four Noble Truths. And I can make them bigger. Ta-da! Four Noble Truths. And of course, these all are found in different language. The language that the Buddha was raised in was called the Pali language, and so the original writings are in Pali. Later on, they were converted into Sanskrit. Anyway, You don't need to learn those words. You just need to know what the truths are. So the first truth, now I can put it in a different color. Now let's do red and not have it so big. Suffering is universal. Got it?
Got it.
You agree?
Yep.
Sure.
So are you a Buddhist?
I'm not sure yet. You can tell me more, then maybe I'll have an answer.
Okay.
I'm sure.
all right.
I'm sure once you get the other three down, I'll be able to tell if I'm a Buddhist or not.
Yes, you'll be able to tell. Yeah, because this doctrine here is fairly well agreed upon by most human beings. Not many human beings can say that suffering is limited, and only a few people get it. They basically look at life and say it's just about everywhere. So everybody gets a chance to have their share of suffering. And the thing is, the suffering is comparative, but it's always personal. You know, we can look at, let's say, I don't care, let's say you you get in a car wreck and you get your leg broken, and so you're there in the hospital and you're in tons of pain because your broken leg, and someone comes in and says, whoa, that's really bad. Yeah, it's really bad. Well, gosh, you know, I can understand that, but you know, there's a guy down two rooms down, he got both his legs cut off in a car wreck. So see, you should be thankful. And it doesn't work that way. We don't just compare our suffering and it makes it better. Our suffering is our own. Our suffering is completely subjective, and we can't share levels of suffering with others. We only have our own. And the suffering that we have, even if other people might say, oh, that's not that bad, you know, that's not the point. Not the point how bad it is. The point is you're having it. It's yours, and you are in fact suffering. So again, most people would agree with that particular truth from Buddhism. This one here, we'll see if you're a Buddhist. Suffering comes from desire. What do you think? Anybody agree with this?
Desire for what?
In general, desire for any less painful experience. So if you were in a car wreck and you broke your leg and you're laying there in the hospital bed and you're saying, I wished I didn't have a broken leg and the pain from this, then you're having desire, aren't you? You're desiring to be in a different state. Not that you're desiring to be in Arkansas, but you're desiring to not have this pain in your life. So suffering isn't just pain. Suffering is the psychological attitude that you have that says, I don't want it anymore. Because, and I think you might all understand this, anyone out here ever engage in a kind of sporting activity when you were in high school? Nobody, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, I have.
Okay. And tell me one of the more the less pleasant things you were made to do.
Well, I
Running.
field, thrower, so running was not very fun.
No, running is not fun at all to a lot of people. When I was in high school and I was in the wrestling team, we were made to go run. And there used to be, there 140, between 132nd and 144th and L Street. They're still part of the building back there, but there used to be a big building there, a Western Electric building. And they had all the land from 132nd to 144th all the way back to the railroad tracks. And mostly, about a third of it was the building and the rest of it was just open land. And the coach would send us out to run around that property, run all the way around it and then come back, because our school was right across the street. That was, it used to be Millard High School there. Now it's Millard Central Middle School. That was the high school. And so we just have to go hop across the street and then just run around that and come back. And so I had a very, very strong aversion to running. And so I would leave last. And then when we got to the across L Street, I would just go lay down in the ditch.
Huh.
And then when everyone came back around, everyone passed, then I just get up and then run in. That way I could keep myself from that dreaded suffering of running, because I hated running, just hated running. I got caught a couple of times, but mostly I got away with it. But when we had to do it inside, and it was different when we had to run, in the gym, back and forth and stuff like that. I couldn't get away from that, but I just hated running, and I was in bad shape. So, anyway, but there were people who wanted to do well in their sporting activity, so they experienced pain, that pain of running, because it can hurt. It can hurt. You get some pretty big side aches from that. You get some pretty achy muscles. So there's pain there, but they put themselves through it willingly, don't they? Does that mean they're just kind of a whack job, a masochist? Well, maybe, but they don't want that to stop. They don't mind it being there because it's a part of the process of growth. They actually, in their mind, it's not that they're enjoying the suffering, but they're in their mind, they're actually welcoming it. It's a part of what they have to go through. It's a part of the process. So they're not seeking a different state. Does this make sense? So if you're having a pain or something that is coming into your body, there's pain, but suffering in pain is different. Pain is just a physical sensation. Suffering is the intellectual and emotional response to it. And if you are okay with that state, then there's no suffering. Suffering exists because we desire to be in a different state. Capiche?
Capiche.
Apprende.
Okay. The third noble truth. Suffering can cease. So, a good number of you sounded like you believe that suffering is universal. I'm sure some of you actually believe that suffering comes from desire, given the explanation that I gave. Do you believe suffering can cease?
When I'm dead.
At death, yes. Well, that is if there's no bad place you go to after death. Also, that means you don't come back again and suffer all over again in reincarnation. So if you believe that suffering, you don't believe that there is a bad place that people go when they die, or if you don't believe that people are reincarnated and come back and they can suffer again, then sure, you would believe that suffering can cease. Okay. So there are actually quite a few people who could agree with all three of these points here in modern Hinduism, these Four Noble Truths. Here's where the departure comes, is that this ceasing comes from following the eightfold path. Ceasing from suffering comes from following the eightfold path. So if you hold to all four of these, then you are probably a Buddhist. Probably a Buddhist. Not necessarily, but probably. There's a couple other things you have to hold to also. You have to hold that the Buddha was an enlightened one and that he gave us these truths. That's also an important doctrine. You would also have to believe in pantheistic monism and in a type of reincarnation for you to be a Buddhist.
Is there moksha in Buddhism?
There is not moksha in Buddhism. There is a similar dynamic, but it's not moksha. It's not moksha. And we'll get into that maybe yet today, probably yet today. Okay. So the Eightfold Path, I'm not going to make you memorize for purposes of a quiz or a test the entire Eightfold Path. I'll just say it's 8 things. They all start with the word right. The right-mindedness, right thoughtfulness, right activity, you know, all sorts of right things that you do. So you do all these things right, and then if you do them right and do them long enough and well enough, then you can end your suffering and your desire. Now, the Buddhism, the goal is to end the suffering, but you can't really address the suffering because it's just a byproduct. What you can address is desire. So what you're doing is you're not trying to, if you're a good Buddhist, you're not trying to not suffer, you're trying to not have desire. That's what you're actively trying to accomplish, is to not have any desires. Okay. So if you are right now sitting and listening to me and you are doing everything in your power to not have any desires, then I would say you're probably a Buddhist. But if there is anyone out there who says, you know, my desire to, you know, go grab a Twinkie is a fine desire. My desire to, let's say, lay down and take a nap when I'm done with this boring class, that's a fine desire. Or my desire to, well, I don't care, stay living for the next 80 years. That's a fine desire. Pardon?
So,
Go ahead.
Desire to not have desires.
So that's one of the logical problems with Buddhism. It's not to them, but it's from the outside when you're looking at it in a from the sense of apologetics, where you're trying to argue from the outside, or someone's either trying to defend it or someone from the outside is attacking it. That's one of the weaknesses, is that you can't technically speaking, you can only work towards the ending of desire by not desiring it. And of course they understand. They've had, you know, hundreds of years of people telling them that's silly. You know, how can you pursue something when you have to live every single moment as if the thing you're pursuing is something that you shouldn't pursue? Intellectually, that's a logical problem that Buddhists have, but they get around it. They have their way of defending it. So I'm not going to comment on how good the defense is or not, but they certainly do that. They don't walk around saying, "Oh well, I'm stupid. I don't understand that you can't desire, you can't desire, seek to end desire unless you're desiring to seeking to end desire." They realize that. So, okay, all righty. By the way, I didn't even ask about this. Is the sound quality? Because this is from my new camera. Is the sound quality all right?
Yes.
Okay. I know the visual quality is far better than that other camera that I had, and it was far better than the camera that I had actually on my laptop. So this is very nice. Okay. So, any questions about the Four Noble Truths? No.
So will we have to know all the Eightfold Path, or
No, you don't. You will not be required to answer on a test or a quiz what any of the individual eightfold path elements are. You'll need to know that the ceasing from following the eightfold path is one of the Four Noble Truths.
Okay.
Got that?
Got it.
Yeah. I need to figure out how to teach these classes in chunks of like 15 and 30 minutes, because I still haven't figured out how to. I tried to take some of the lectures that I've done in critical reasoning class and break them down to like 2 45-minute or 2 50-minute classes, and still YouTube is saying they're too long. So I have to figure out how to do that. I have to have a timer in front of me, like a chess clock. Okay, after 15 minutes, let's make a thematic break here, something like that. But I'm not. I'm way from learning how to make that happen. I'm just simply don't have the awareness of it. But at some point I will. Hopefully I'll get better as time goes on. So no other questions about the Four Noble Truths. Nope. Okay. And it's probably silly because my guess is that no one's ever going to go back and sit through and listen to these videos. The only person who would do that is someone who wasn't here. They were unable to be here for the class for some reason, or that, you know, maybe they were too hungover or something, and so they didn't want to miss out the material, so they went and listened to the class again. But otherwise, that's the only time people are going to listen to it, and I don't even know if they'll do that then. I just don't know. Okay. All righty then. Then why don't we move then on to just a little bit more of what happened in the Buddha's life, shall we? Since today is mostly kind of initially the background and the history of Buddhism. So the Buddha and this teaching was well received in India. And he had the good fortune of being able to live another, how long did he live? I think he lived another like 60 some years after this enlightenment experience that he had under the tree. And which, by the way, hello, the tree that he was sitting under is referred to as the Bodhi tree. Oops. I go back to blue. It's not going to work. The Bodhi tree. That just means it's just the tree of light is what that means. The Bodhi tree. So, so we'll do a little more history then. The Buddha lived for many, many years afterwards, and he spent that time traveling around India and teaching what he had learned. Like most of the founders of or religious traditions, they didn't write stuff down themselves. Their teachings were written down by others. He just went around and taught, verbally taught people. Now, he lived in, originally he lived in northern India, but he traveled throughout India. Also, seemingly he traveled up into China and possibly east into the Indochina Peninsula, and possibly west over into what we call the Near East. But he spent the rest of his life traveling. Now, he didn't travel the whole time because you can't really do that in India, because India has 2 rainy seasons. They have a rainy season in the spring and a rainy season in the fall, sort of like what we have here in our country. And then during the summer, it's warm and dry, and during the winter, it's cold and dry. Except that the rainy seasons there are really, really, really rainy. They're monsoon rainy. They're so rainy that you can't travel. The roads, of course, were all dirt roads, and the roads would have 8 inches deep of mud. So you can't walk on them. You can't hardly take a horse on them or a cow because they get stuck, and you certainly can't take a wagon through that. And so during the rainy seasons, most people just hang out. They don't go places, they hang out. And so during the 2 rainy seasons, the Buddha, wherever he was, would end up just staying there in that town, or at if he was staying at the home of someone who welcomed him in so he could teach him, that's where he'd stay. So during these rainy seasons, he would be sedentary, and if people wanted to, they could come to him to hear him teach, which they did. And then during the dry seasons, he would go out to the people and teach them. But seemingly that's what he spent most of his time doing, was teaching people and teaching them these doctrines. Okay, and he became very, very popular. He had literally tens of thousands of followers during those several decade period that he was teaching. And then finally, I don't know for sure because there's a couple different stories about it, but the one that I think is probably the most likely, although I don't know why I think that, is that he died of some kind of food poisoning. And although he's probably in his 80s, and so that's way, you don't even have a reason to die that late in India, because people usually died in their 40s. So just natural causes would have been a fine thing too, but he died. But he, the reason I'm even talking about that is because before he died, one of the last things he said was that people shouldn't be looking to him for truth. That just like he did, he wasn't looking to some other person to give him the truth. He found the truth inside of himself. So he told them to don't take what he was teaching as the source of truth, but they should look within themselves to find that truth. Look deep within themselves. Okay. And that's important because it will, the two main branches of Buddhism come out of that. So that particular statement. So, okay, so we have now then the death of the Buddha, and then we have people taking up his teachings and starting little Buddhist schools. They had what are called sanghas. Sangha is it's not like well, it could be you could see it as a temple, but it's also a place of worship, as a place of teaching. But it's where people would go if you wanted to learn more about Buddhism and learn how to practice it. They didn't have anything written down right away, but there was a group of people who were the earliest followers of him. I'm going to go to a different thing here. The earliest followers of the Buddha after his death, because they had been with him as he was traveling around all this time. They were called the elders because they were the older ones. They'd been with him. They'd seen his life and they'd heard a great deal of his teaching. And these elders became, well, the word is the word Theravadins. The Theravadins. These were the people who, in the beginning, were considered to be the ones who had heard and captured and were now retelling the teachings of the Buddha, the enlightened one. And they began then this whole process of trying to carry on the legacy of Siddhartha and to advance his teachings to the world around them. The Buddha, let's say this, one of the books that was written, the lotus, the Sutra of the Wonderful Lotus Flower, also known as the Lotus Sutra. I'll put this over here. It's not lettuce. The Lotus Sutra, and the sutra is just a teaching, teaching of the wonderful lotus flower is the long name of that book. In the Lotus Sutra, in the opening scene, you have. Now I'm going to draw. I really don't like doing this because I'm such a lousy drawer with a mouse. I wonder if I could, let me try just for fun here. I'm going to go to a different page and see if I can take my mouse thing out here. See if it'll let me go back to, yes, it's a whole lot easier to draw with this, with my finger than the mouse. So I'll give this a shot here. So, oops. So here's a scene in the Lotus Sutra. You have, it's not drawing. Why isn't it drawing? You have this not drawing. There we go. Nope, still not. Never mind. Put it back on here. You have the Buddha hanging out, sitting up here in front. And he's, of course, in his lotus position. And he's got his hands up and the thumbs curled around, and he's got his feet crossed. And he's saying Om. Okay, so you got a scene where a Buddha's sitting there. And in front of him is a group of people. And they go out as far as the eye can see. So we're talking probably hundreds of thousands of people sitting in front of him. And they are there waiting for him to talk, to give them truth. And then out of his mouth comes wise teachings, and they learn. Okay, sound good? Sounds reasonable, right? Except the thing is, all these people in front of him, you know who they are?
Who?
They are Buddhas. There are other Buddhas. Because he wasn't the only Buddha. He was just a Buddha. And he during his lifetime, he wasn't teaching around, that I'm this special thing here. I'm just a person who has seen truth. He never claimed that he was this super special guy. He was just a guy who learned stuff. He was made aware of it. But by the time you get to the writing of the and that's what he taught, that essentially everyone could become a Buddha. That's what their goal was. They wanted everyone to become enlightened and become their own Buddha. But in the Lotus Sutra, he's not just one of the other Buddhas. He's the Buddha that is larger than life, wiser, more powerful than all the Buddhas. So he's like the Buddha of the Buddhas. He becomes, in Buddhist theology, he becomes almost like the God of the Buddhas. Now, I'm saying this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because Buddhism, in Buddhism, the Buddhists don't claim that they have any gods. They don't have any gods. Now, in many religious traditions, we had our Torn group last Friday that I do, where we do, and anyone's welcome to join. We're actually doing this now by Zoom meeting, so anyone can pop in and join. I don't know if you know what Torn is. You probably don't. Let me hang on here a second. Let me do this. Come on. Is it popping up? Doesn't look like it's popping up. Huh. Well, then maybe it's not going to. Maybe it is. Oh, well. Anyway, I have this group that I started almost 2 years ago at Metro called Torn, T-O-R-N. It stands for Truth or Religious Nonsense. And what it is it's open to anybody who wants to come. We talk about all things relating somehow to religion. And so we have people come in who are atheists, people come in who are agnostics, We have people from all sorts of different religious traditions that come in, and we just sit and chat and talk and compare and challenge and all those different things. The only thing is that when you join the group, you have to sign in, and signing in, it says that you're promising to treat everyone there with respect. So you can never attack anybody. You can never run anybody down. And so it's a chance for people to have a place where they can share and talk, and anybody can talk. And what we do is, anyone says, you want to do a presentation, you want to come in here in a couple of weeks, and you can have the entire hour and a half to present your view on things. That's perfectly fine. You just have to tell us what it is that you're going to be teaching about, and you have to leave time to where you can have questions of your position afterwards. So anyway, at one of these torn meetings last week, and now I completely lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? I launched off on that long thing. Why did I go there? What was I talking about right before that? One of the guys who's there, he considers himself a Buddhist / Taoist. He's both, and so he will teach stuff, but say things, but he makes it very clear that Buddhism is not a religion. He doesn't believe it's a religion. And I said, okay, well, you don't have to if you don't want to believe that it's a religion. It's certainly been recognized in the area of religious studies as one of the 7 major living religions. And if you don't think it should be, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you you have to agree with everyone else. But I said that the reason that I feel comfortable putting it in as a religion is because it has something that fits into the qualities of a divine thing. Remember what those were? I should be able to quiz you on this. What are the qualities of divine thing?
It has to have followers. It has to have a divine superhuman.
No, those are religions.
Oh man.
Can't hear you. What?
What? Oh man. That's
A woman.
so the difference between.
They have to be a divine thing
Made
has
of
to be made of
spirit
spirit stuff.
Oh yeah.
Okay, what else?
Superhuman knowledge.
Suprahuman knowledge. Next.
Immortality. We kind of got that one.
Suprahuman power. And
Future immortality.
future
Someone
immortality.
Ken in the chat said that.
Yeah. And these are the ones that generally are there. Now you're going to find some, by the way. This is not necessarily exactly true of every single divine thing that's ever talked about, but these are the 4 common traits of them. That they have all of these 4 things, and the thing about Buddhism is that Buddhism is a firm believer in the teaching of at least their brand of reincarnation, and their brand of karma. So, and as I teach on this, karma is, first of all, is karma made of physical matter? Is it made of atoms?
No, it's made of spirit stuff.
It's made of spirit stuff. Does karma have superhuman knowledge? Does it know more than the average human being?
Yes.
Yes, karma knows everything, actually.
Yes.
Okay, does karma have superhuman power?
Yeah.
Yes. Does karma go on forever?
Yeah.
Yes. So karma, by definition, would fit under the heading of a divine thing. A divine thing. And that doesn't mean that I believe that Buddhists call karma a god, but they still have something in their belief system that is divine. Okay. But the thing is, now I finally remember what I launched off into all that different thing there about Torn was that this last summer, I read a book. I have to go back, and it's in my phone somewhere because I read it on Kindle. I read a book about the ancient writings and religious practices in up in the what today would be considered to be the United Kingdom and Sweden and down in Denmark and places like that. And in this book, this guy was made this claim that you actually can go back to people, let's say like, I don't care, what was his name? Thor's dad. Did I tell you guys this already?
Odin.
That Odin, you go back in the earliest history of the documents that are available, that you find a guy who was actually a human guy named Odin. And Odin, because he had these great qualities, he ended up over the years became deified. You know what that means?
No.
Became a god.
Became a god.
Oh.
He became a god. They didn't remember him as just a man. They remembered him as a god. So he ended up being deified, and that is true of many people down through the centuries. People end up they become their legend is larger than their life was, and many of them end up becoming deified. They're now a god. When they look back at him, it wasn't just my great grandpa. He was a god. And so the deification of great people is something that's happened in many cultures over the history of mankind. And there are those who actually did the same thing with the Buddha. They deified him. They made him into something that wasn't just a man. And this, you could tell from this scene from the Lotus Sutra, that he was more than just a man. But again, they would say he's not God, and that they don't believe in gods per se. So, but it's, again, that's fairly common. So you have these elders. Now, where did I put the elders? There we go. The elders are teaching people how to achieve enlightenment, and how all this stuff works. And so they had some basic doctrines that came from the Buddha, and such as, suffering is universal, suffering comes from desire, and it can be ended, all those things. But that they borrowed from Buddhism this similar doctrine of the oneness of all things, which you ended up seeing in Hinduism, especially with the bringing in of the doctrine of Brahman, the God behind all the gods, the one thing behind all the one thing, behind all the many things, to the point to where you ended up with the doctrine in Hinduism that there is only one thing, and that the belief in the existence of the many things is in fact what? Maya. Doctrine of Maya. That's illusion. The illusion that there's a whole bunch of different things. In reality, there's just one thing. And you practice your Hindu practices until you reach that moment of spiritual enlightenment. Not enlightenment's the right word, it's just spiritual understanding. Because the word enlightenment is usually tied just to Buddhism. You get to this point of spiritual understanding that there is only one thing in the universe. And so you have that similar doctrine then was pulled over into Buddhism from Hinduism. that there's just one thing. And in in Hinduism, when you achieve that awareness, that's when you achieve moksha. You are released from the wheel of existence. And again, Buddhism is similar but different in that you do also come to this notion of the oneness of all things, but there's also the notion of the noneness. Oops. Of self. There's not a self. Now, in Hinduism, if you remember, the goal was becoming, reaching this understanding that Atman is Brahman. Remember that? Yes, no?
Yes, yes, yes.
You were asleep during that time? Okay, the Atman is Brahman, that your individual soul is in fact the soul of the universe. And so all of the practices, all your different type of yogic practices are intended on getting, it's like slamming that into your head so many times that you finally get it. And when you finally do, you achieve moksha. The Buddhist doctrine is different in that essentially there's no Atman. Oops. Also known as there's no self. Now that's different than your self is Brahman. Here the teaching is your self is not a self. There's not an individual you. You don't exist separate from the universe. So that's a big part of what it is that people are practicing, or that's what they're trying to get to that awareness in Buddhism, and you reach that awareness primarily through one of the yogas. I'm not saying all the rest of them don't have value, but overwhelmingly in Buddhism, the one yoga that everyone has to do is meditation. Meditation brings about the understanding that there's no Atman. Okay. And all of this stuff in here, all of this is in every branch of Buddhism. These are some of the core doctrines of Orthodox Buddhism. All these things. Did I write mediation? Since that's what I do for a living, I wrote mediation.
Meditation.
And no one called me on it. Why not? Meditation, not mediation. In Buddhism, if you come to that place, if you come to that state of awareness that there is no Atman, you actually can achieve enlightenment. And that can happen to you at any point in your life. In Hinduism, the only time you essentially would escape from the wheel is at your death. So you achieve that sense of the Maya of all things, and you're aware now that your Atman is Brahman, and then you die after that. In Buddhist belief system, you can reach this state of enlightenment and still stay alive for a long time. You can, if you choose, you can choose to stay on the earth as the Buddha did. So you can choose to stay. And if you do, that means you are a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is that person who decides, even though they have come to that intellectual and spiritual awareness that there's no self, and so they've achieved enlightenment, they decide, I'm going to stay behind rather than go straight to where you'll go otherwise, which we'll talk about in a minute, because I want to help other people to achieve that also. If they choose to stay, then they're a bodhisattva. If they choose to leave, immediately becoming to this enlightenment, then they are called an arhat. You know, and if you've lived a long life full of suffering, and you achieve enlightenment, and there's no self, what the heck, just go, and then suffering's all done. It's never going to happen anymore. And so you could, no one thinks that they're weenies because they leave, but they do think that if they stay, that they're doing that because they have compassion. Compassion for the others who haven't come to that that state of enlightenment yet. So they have compassion on others, and they said, because I care so much about other people, I'm going to stay back and teach, just like Siddhartha did. Okay. Basic Buddhist doctrine. If you achieve this state, which, by the way, you may not for hundreds of thousands of lifetimes, just like in Hinduism, but if you achieve this state, then you understand that there's no Atman, there's no self. So what happens next? Anyone know? Anyone? The state of nirvana.
Yes. Smells like Team Spirit.
Smells like that, doesn't it? Yes. Nirvana has several different connotations, but the basic root meaning of it is that sort of a thing. Emptiness or nothingness. Now, to we people in the West, that might not sound like a super awesome state of being. But one of the analogy that's been used over the years by Buddhist teachers is that it's as if when a drop of water um, falls into the sea. It's not bad. Falls into the sea. What happens to the drop of water?
Becomes the sea.
Yeah. Is it still a drop of water?
Not after it goes into the sea.
It's not any longer, huh? So the drop of water goes to what kind of state?
Nothingness.
Nothingness. It's not the thing anymore. Okay. So it goes in a state of nothingness. Now, it's not that it doesn't exist, because this drop of water is made up of what?
Water.
Yeah.
It's
Life
made of-
energy. Life
Spirit
energy.
stuff.
Yes.
It's made of. Now we're using an analogy here, so don't mix it up in the analogy. It's made of H2O, right? Oops.
Oh.
It's made of H2O.
Technically not.
Yeah, it's technically not made of that. Well, I didn't want to do the two down below there. Two H's and an O. And what's the ocean made of?
Also H2O.
H2O. So they're both made of the same thing. So what happens here is that the drop of water comes down here, and it hasn't changed its essence whatsoever. It's exactly what it was before. The only thing that's happened that's different now is that what's gone?
The individual nature of the water drop.
The distinction.
What's gone is what?
Its shape.
Its edges.
Surface tension?
Oh.
Its edges are gone. So it's still down here. It's just edges are gone, right? So it's lost its individuality. It is now, and if you look at it from the outside, again, by structure, it seems to be saying the same thing as Atman is Brahman, the oneness there.
Right.
But it's different. Theologically, it means something different. To achieve enlightenment and to get to that state of awareness of the that all things are one already. Because the thing is that in Buddhism, in Hinduism, there's no Atman. I'm sorry. From the Buddhist perspective, there's no Atman. There is no self. Okay, that's the key. There is no self. If you think that there is a self here, you are greatly mistaken. Hinduism says there is a self, but that self is the same thing. So in Hinduism, there's a self down here that's a part of the water. Buddhism says there's no self. Buddhism said there's no self up here even. You are mistaken if you think that it looks like this. If there's a drop of water up here that needs to go down here and lose itself. Down here, there is a self. You're just saying that self is the same as everything else here. So there becomes an emptiness in that there's no edges there, and there really were no edges. You are the sea, and there was never a you in the first place. So it's a doctrine of no self, doctrine of anatta, the lack of self. Okay. And this is essentially, all of this that I'm teaching you right here, this is essentially not only the doctrines of the elders. Again, it's essentially Orthodox Buddhist teaching. Okay, so all that's the same. The difference is because you ended up having two major branches of Buddhism. The Theravadan school, and then you have the Mahayana school, or Mahayanans. So you have these two branches of the Buddhists. Okay, so they all have these core doctrines, but what you have to do to reach it is way different. So these two different branches of Buddhism that are out there today are quite a bit different in their practices, and they each think the other branch is wrong. Got it? Okay.
Got it.
I think it's 1:47, which means what?
It's time for us to get the heck out of here.
Time for you to bug on out of here. Okay. So again, there'll be another quiz up for you probably tomorrow
Okay.
that you could take. So you should be able to and have done taken 3 quizzes before we see each other again. Okay. And
Roger that.
and your papers are due when?
Wednesday.
Wednesday. So you'll be emailing me your papers. Got it?
Cool.
A draft.
What were the
carpet?
topics of the paper again? It's in the syllabus, right?
It's what?
The topics of the paper are in the syllabus, right?
There's copies in the syllabus, and the just a real quick reminder here. It's the creation account of how the universe came about, or how the country came about, or how the people came about, how that tribe came about, how the world or universe is created, how it came about. So it's a creation account is what we're looking at here, and it has to be in one of the religious traditions that you were not raised in. And not just that, if you were raised in, because someone asked me that, can I do whatever? Can I do, can I do Islam? Well, you can't do Islam if you were raised in if you were raised in a Christian tradition. You can't do Islam because they both go back to Genesis. So you have the same creation account for Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. So if you're raised in one of those 3, or if you are in one of those 3 now, you can't do any of those 3.
And the paper that we're emailing you, is this just the first draft, or is it the whole paper?
It's the whole paper.
So it's the final finished product.
It's the final finished product that you send to me, and then I find out what your if you did it right, and if there's things you've left out and things you need to expand on. But the entire paper should be there with all the sources.
Okay.
Okay. All righty then. Well, I think then we are done, and we can call it a day. See you on Wednesday.
All right.